Okay, picture this. You're in the late Roman Empire. A brand new faith is exploding, but it's got a huge problem. How do you tell your story in a world that's completely steeped in pagan literature and philosophy? How do you build a new culture using the tools of the old one? Today, we're going to explore how early Christians didn't just write new books. They completely reinvented literature itself.
So get this. This quote, it's from a Roman aristocrat and poet named Proba. Can you even imagine hearing that back in the 4th century? Virgil, the guy who wrote the epic poem about the founding of pagan Rome, somehow sang about Christ? It's a completely shocking idea, and it perfectly captures the tension of this entire era.
So how on earth did that happen? Well, the answer reveals this incredible story of cultural collision, of radical creativity, and really, the sheer power of interpretation. It's a story about how reading a text wasn't just about understanding the world, it was about literally building a new one. And it would end up shaping the course of Western civilization. All right, let's dive in. First up, Rome meets Jerusalem. You see, before any poets could get to work, there was this massive intellectual hurdle. This new Christian faith had to somehow make its case in the super sophisticated, philosophy-driven world of Rome. The big question was, could Christian thought and the Roman tradition even exist together?
So you had these thinkers, let's call them the diplomats, who tried to build a bridge between these two worlds. A guy named Lactantius, for example, made this really clever argument. He basically said, hey, all those Roman values you love, wisdom, justice, all that stuff from Cicero, they're not the enemy. Instead, he argued that Christianity actually fulfilled them. He was using the language of Roman philosophy as a kind of on-ramp to what he called the true religion found in Scripture.
Okay, so that was one way. But some people, they took a way more radical approach. They weren't just interested in having a polite debate with Roman culture. No, they decided to hijack its most prized art form, the epic poem. And the main tool they used for this was a brilliant technique called the cento. Honestly, think of it as the ultimate literary remix. You know, like a DJ sampling old tracks to make a new hit? That's what they were doing. They were literally taking pagan classics apart and rebuilding them, line by line, for a totally new Christian purpose.
One of the first to do this was this Spanish priest, Juvencus. You can think of him as the artist. He comes out and says, my song is going to be about Christ's deeds. And how does he do it? He rewrites the entire Gospels into thousands of lines of hexameter. That's the exact same epic meter Virgil used for the Aeneid. He was basically turning the Gospels into a blockbuster Roman epic.
But Proba, the woman from our opening quote, she took it to a whole other level. I mean, this is just wild. She didn't just copy Virgil's style, she literally took his poems, cut out individual lines, and then pasted them together in a new order to tell the biblical story, all the way from Genesis to the life of Christ. The implication was just mind-blowing. It's like she was saying Virgil himself was a secret prophet for Christianity and he didn't even know it.
So while the poets were busy remixing literature, a completely different kind of fight was breaking out among theologians. For these guys, the theological warriors, Scripture wasn't just for inspiration. No, it was a weapon to be used in some very high-stakes battles over doctrine.
And the biggest battlefield was something called the Arian crisis. This was a huge, bitter fight that split the church right down the middle, all over the question of Christ's divine nature. And listen, the stakes were incredibly high. How you interpreted a single verse from the Bible could get you labeled a heretic and exiled.
Which brings us to a guy we can call the warrior, Hilary of Poitiers. Now, he says he's not interested in a vain fight with words, but he was an amazing fighter with words. To make his case for Trinitarian theology, he dived deep into the Old Testament, pulling out figures like Abraham and Moses to show patterns that supported his argument. For him, reading Scripture was like marshaling your soldiers for battle.
Okay, so you've got the diplomat, building bridges. You've got the artist, creating these wild new forms, and you've got the warrior, fighting for doctrine. All of these threads, they all come together and culminate in one of the most influential thinkers of all time, Augustine of Hippo.
Augustine was really the perfect person to pull all this together. I mean, he was a master of Roman rhetoric, so he had all that classical training. But then he takes all that brainpower and turns it inward, towards Scripture. And what he comes up with is this incredibly powerful, deeply personal theory of how to read, one that connected hardcore intellectual analysis with a real spiritual journey.
He was a key figure in formalizing this idea that you could read Scripture on 4 different levels. Think of it like a journey. First, you have the literal or historical level, just what actually happened. Then you go deeper to the allegorical. What does this story tell us about what we should believe?
After that comes the moral sense. Okay, how should this change the way I live my life? And finally, you reach the anagogical level. What does this tell me about my ultimate hope, about eternity? This four-part system, it would basically define how people read the Bible for the next 1,000 years.
But here's the key thing about Augustine. For him, this was not just some academic game. You can see it in this quote. He saw Scripture as this profound mystery. He believed that the very act of struggling with the text, of wrestling with its meaning, that process itself was what changed you. It wasn't about finding a tidy answer. It was about the transformative journey of conversion for your own soul.
So, where did all this lead? Well, the work of these early interpreters, the diplomats, the artists, the warriors, and a synthesizer like Augustine, it didn't just stay on dusty old scrolls. Its legacy was literally built into the fabric of the next 1,000 years of civilization.
I mean, think about it. Their way of reading created whole new types of literature, like the biblical epic. It shaped the very language of theology. And that allegorical way of seeing the world, it became the symbolic language for everything. It was carved into the stone of cathedrals, painted onto church walls. Their interpretation of texts literally built the visual, intellectual, and spiritual world of the Middle Ages.
And that really gets us to the heart of it all. The big takeaway here is that how you read a text can literally change the world. These early Christian thinkers proved that reading isn't a passive thing you do. It's an active, creative force. It's a powerful engine that can build a new world right out of the words of the old one.
Which, of course, leaves us with a question for today. Their struggle, trying to make ancient words feel alive and relevant for their new world, that's a challenge that's just as real for us now as it was back in the twilight of Rome. Our world is also built on foundational texts, right? Constitutions, scientific theories, religious scriptures. The question they leave for us is a simple one, but it's a big one. How are we going to choose to read them?